Good morning, everyone. Happy New Year and welcome back to the ICG's Digital Academy webinar series. I'm Sally Alsop, the ICG committee member responsible for running our webinar programme. So in today's webinar, we're delighted to welcome back Liz Norman of Elizabeth Norman International, who is joined by Tina Holt of JT HR Solutions. Liz began her career as a market researcher working for IBM. She then joined a small marketing recruitment firm, launching their market research division before setting up E&I, specialising in recruitment for the insight industry in 1989. Liz is a member of APSCO, the professional body representing the recruitment industry, and has taken their legal advice as well as the advice of individual lawyers on IR35 and its implications. Tina is an HR expert who for 20 or more years worked with two major global oil and gas technical engineering recruitment businesses as a global HR director. In 2018, Tina established JT HR Solutions to bring the HR knowledge and expertise gained in a global recruitment business into the SME market. Liz and Tina will be taking us through the latest developments in IR35 regulation, and we'll outline what this means for us as small businesses. As usual, there'll be a Q&A session at the end, so please type your questions into the question box as we go along, and I'll read them out when Liz and Tina have completed their presentation. So we are really grateful to Talkback Viewing Studios for sponsoring this webinar. Talkback Viewing Studio is a custom-built facility on the outskirts of Nottingham. It has two ground floor viewing studios with plenty of on-site parking. For the smaller budget, Talkback has a non-viewed room with rates comparable to a hotel meeting room, but with the added benefits of a viewing facility's front of house team to assist you. With the country once again under lockdown, Mike Harvey, Talkback's MD, appreciates that it's not currently the time for face-to-face research, but Talkback is ready to welcome you back when you feel the time is right. Before I hand over to Liz and Tina, here are the next webinars to note down in your diaries. We're able to offer great value sponsorship opportunities with each of our webinars. Sponsorship normally costs £100 for a lot of exposure on our website, mailers and social media, and of course on the day. So please contact Lucy if you'd like to know more. So our speakers today are Liz Norman of Elizabeth Norman International and Tina Holt of JT HR Solutions. And I will now hand over to Liz and Tina.
Thank you. Okay, so we should now be coming onto my screen.
We can see your screen, just need to put it in full slide.
Yeah.
Perfect. Okay, I'll go on silent.
Thank you. Okay, so first of all, introductions, Liz.
So I'm Liz Norman. I am the owner and founder of E&I, which, as Sally kindly said, was set up in 1989, 32 years ago. To start with, most of our recruitment was permanent. I would say for around 10 years, we've been recruiting contractors and temps. So we have both, including temps on our payroll. And that is an area that is expanding at the moment. It was expanding anyway, but that's definitely been accelerated by the need for more flexible working with COVID. We have set up new services on the back of that. I am developing a WhatsApp community, and if people would like to join that, I would be very interested in hearing about it. We're also offering a statement of work model, which I can tell you a little bit more about later.
Okay, thank you, Liz. And hi, everybody. I'm Tina Holt, and my company, as Liz said, is JT HR Solutions. So I've been a HR director within the recruitment sector for over 20 years now, predominantly as a global HR director, and recently set up my own independent HR consultancy to support the recruitment businesses who don't actually have internal HR and to give them that support. Okay, so just to start off, I'm just going to give a little bit of a background and then I'll hand you over to Liz. So IR35 was originally introduced in 2000, so that's when it first came into force, and it was introduced to identify limited company contractors who were effectively classed as disguised employees, and HMRC felt that, well, Inland Revenue as it was known then, and hence the IR35, felt that they were avoiding paying the required tax because they were effectively disguised employees and should be paying tax as employees. So that's when it all started. I was in the IT sector at the time and it was very prevalent to us at that time. And in 2017, the off-payroll working rules came into force for the public sector. And now they're looking at bringing that into the private sector. Now, 2020 was when this legislation was meant to come into play, but obviously it didn't for various reasons, and one of them being the COVID. And the legislation has not yet been passed. People are still lobbying for it not to be passed. So it's already been postponed once, and we're not sure it's going to be postponed again. So it's likely to come into effect in April the 6th for the private sector. So what's happening is the government are expecting to raise an additional £1.9 billion in tax that they're currently not collecting from individuals for, as you see in the bullet points, for NI, apprenticeship levy and tax that needs to be paid. So these rules are specifically for defining whether a contractor is a genuine contractor or is a genuine disguised employee, and nothing has changed in that respect. It's been like that since its inception in 2000, but what's changed and what is changing with the off-payroll rules is that from April the 6th, medium and large private sector businesses will be responsible for identifying whether their contractors fall within or outside of IR35. Whereas previously the onus was on the limited company, it's now the onus is going on to the end user. So that's a massive change in the private sector, which obviously, as we said, already applied 3 years ago to the public sector. Now, what's important to note here is that small businesses are not affected. So if you work for a boutique agency or you work for a small company, then you can carry on as you are with the limited company deciding on the status of their workers. So if you're working for a company with a turnover of 10 million or less, 5 million or less on the balance sheet and 50 or less employees, then that doesn't come under the new legislation. You can carry on as you are. What is important to note here, though, is that you really need to know whether the company that you're working for is a small company actually fits this criteria, because as Liz and I were talking yesterday, Companies House doesn't necessarily tell you that. So it's important that you go directly to the end user, to the client, and ask them specifically for that information. And as it stands at the moment, if the legislation is passed, they will then have 45 days to respond to you to give you that information. And what's also very important to note is that any contractors engaged on a contract now that runs into April and past the 5th of April of 2021, they will automatically fall within the rules of the new off-payroll rules. So it's important that everybody starts to prepare for this now. So I'm going to hand you over to Liz. I'll keep control of the slide. So Liz, you just tell me when you want me to move to the next slide. So I'll pass you over to Liz now.
Okay, thank you, Tina. What I wanted to say is I appreciate it is a huge change, so you may well have questions. If you could put them into the chat box and then we'll cover them at the end, because it is quite complicated, it may be that we're going to cover your question later. So rather than cover them now, dot around a bit, we'll try and sort them all out at the end. So yeah, a huge change. I also want to sort of reiterate the point that Tina made, in that, yes, it's a huge change for you, the contractors, but it's obviously a huge change for the employers as well. They will be, as Tina said, responsible if you aren't paying the correct tax. And it is putting a lot of them off employing contractors moving forward. So it's important to think how we support them and encourage them so that they will continue to employ contractors after April. So yeah, we'll talk a little bit more about that. This first slide is trying to make it a little bit simpler as to the sort of things that you need to think about whether to determine whether you are inside or outside IR35. So the first point is the company that you're working for small? We've covered this. If they're small, it's absolutely fine. You can carry on working exactly as you are now. If they're not small, then you may need to worry about IR35, but you don't have to do it if you're being paid through a recruitment company or an umbrella company, because if you are being paid in this way, you're already paying PAYE. So in that case, you really don't have to worry. If, however, you are a limited company and you are responsible for your own tax, and it could be that you're still getting money through a third party, but ultimately you are responsible for your own tax, then you do need to start thinking about how you're going to operate moving forwards. So you are inside IR35 if you need to pay PAYE moving forward. You can no longer operate as a limited company, and your employer needs to ensure that the correct amount of tax and national insurance is paid. You're outside IR35 if you can show that you are a genuine contractor, if HMRC are convinced that you are effectively operating as a small company, and we'll go through how you can do that. So Tina, next slide.
Please.
When we were going through the slides, we added this in because we realised there is quite a lot of paperwork that needs to be done. Some of it may not be totally clear at the moment, but just to sort of highlight it here. So Tina's already covered the first point. If they are small, then ask for evidence that they are small. Companies have 45 days to provide that. Now, that may seem a bit daft and isn't necessary. If you know them well, you know they've got 6 people, small turnover, then you don't need to worry. But there are quite a lot of sort of smallish, medium-sized-ish companies in the profession. If they're like that, and you need to be certain, so just check out whether they are small or not. They have to give you those figures. You can, as Tina said, you can look in Companies House, but actually for smaller companies, it doesn't really give you all the information that you need. So that's the first thing. If you're inside IR35, if you've suddenly been told, and I do know of quite a few contractors like this who've been working for larger companies, and suddenly the larger company says, yep, you're going to be inside IR35 in future. You need to go to this umbrella company or this recruitment company, and they're going to be sorting out your PAYE and national insurance. And you think to yourself, but you know, I don't think that's right. I think I am genuinely doing work as a contractor, and I don't want to go through this third party. Then you can ask for an employment statement determination, which has to state the reasons why the payroll working rules apply to you, the worker, and you can raise a dispute if you disagree. So you don't have to accept just a blanket ban on contractors, which I know some companies are doing. So that's if you're inside IR35. If you're outside IR35, i.e. you are confident that you're a genuine contractor, and the company you're working for is also confident that you're a genuine contractor, then Obviously, you still have to have insurance. You have to have confirmation from that company that the work is outside IR35. You have to have a different contract. Now, that's worth thinking about now for those of you currently working with a larger company, because that contract should be looked at now so that it is changed by April, and it has to make clear the criteria for IR35 and how that's being met. The final thing, which we'll sort of cover later on, is providing evidence of substitution, i.e. you've got a mate that can help with the work. So Tina, next slide. There's been an awful lot of negative talk about IR35, and I don't think any of us would have chosen to bring it in, but you have to think positively about it. It is an opportunity for businesses and contractors to think differently, and you know, the insight profession has shown over the last year that it is very good at pivoting. In fact, a director I was speaking to yesterday said she'd never heard it used as much. So I'm sure that we can pivot for this as well. It doesn't have to mean the end of contracting, but for contracting to continue, you do have to revolutionise the operating models to future-proof medium and larger businesses. The key thing is that businesses need to rethink the work that they're outsourcing, and they need to contract out specific projects, which again in Insight should be possible, rather than employing contractors to do the ongoing work of full-time employees. The other thing that it's great is that small companies, frankly, will have the advantage when competing for skills, because they're not going to have to comply with this legislation. So so actually it could be quite good news for small companies, and I think it means that larger companies will be forced in the end to think about how they change their models in order to compete for the same sort of quality of skills. So the options for you as a contractor. So the first is obviously that you accept going inside IR35. If you're going to be inside IR35, you can actually go on your employer's payroll, but you have to have a 0 hours contract. I do know a few research agencies that are working it that way. The other option is to go on the payroll of a recruitment company. E&I run payroll services, and I know a few of the other recruiters do as well. And your third option is to go on an umbrella company payroll. I had a lot of questions about this last year when I did the talk. And the important thing to check with an umbrella company is that it is FCSA regulated and that they have professional passport accreditation. If they have those things, then you can be sure that they are a legitimate company and they will do a good service. So that makes it a lot easier then to choose companies. The problem, obviously, if you're inside IR35 is you will be contributing to that extra 1.9 billion in tax that the government's hoping to raise. That's through less tax efficient ways of paying yourself with dividends, employers, NI. Well, actually, that's the employer's cost, not yours. But yeah, it will cost you extra money. And as I've just said, it also costs the employer extra money because they have to pay employers NI. They'll have to pay a margin to a third party on paying that NI. And they'll have the VAT burden. Obviously, normally you don't pay that on payroll, but if you're doing it through a third party, then VAT has to be applied, which, whilst might not be a real cost, does impact on cash flow. So, you know, there are downsides of doing it, but there are 3 ways that are possible. The other way is obviously to work outside IR35, and obviously the first thing you can do is you can demonstrate that you are a contractor. And the second thing is that there is a model called statement of work, which is when a third party, and E&I are doing this, go into a company and they audit the work and the contractors. They decide on particular projects and they take on responsibility of choosing and hiring those contractors. And if it is done in that way, then contractors can continue to work as contractors. They're not on PAYE. Tina, do you have anything to add on any of that? Because I've got to the end of that slide.
Yeah, no, not at this point, Liz. I do think it's important to reiterate one from the previous slide about the putting contractors on a blanket inside of the IR35 rules. That's something we probably could talk about another time, but we're both aware of companies that are just putting a blanket over contractors to say everybody's in. So it is important that you get that determination to say that you're not falling inside.
Yeah, and that you feel confident you can challenge it, because you can.
Yeah. Okay, next slide then, I'll move on. Okay.
Right, now this is the more complicated one. Like a lot of government legislation, it's well, in fact, actually the reason that it still hasn't been put through is that it was so badly worded that it needs to be reworded and put again through Parliament. So needless to say, none of this is that clear at the moment, but I'm going to have a go at talking about the criteria, and then I'm going to let Tina add her bits in case I miss something. Okay. So the criteria that you need to show that you are a genuine contractor and outside IR35 are these three things. You need to show all three of them. The first one is the simple one. So that's rights of substitution. And that basically means that you can, you literally have to tell the client who will be covering you if, for example, you're suddenly plunged into homeschooling, or you're sick, but you know that this is not just a one-man band. There is more than one of you, and that you have a mate that's perfectly capable of doing the work if you're not able to, and you have to let the client know who that person, that individual is. Tina, do you have anything to add to that?
Yeah, basically, yeah. So it's whether you can realistically substitute yourself into that role if you're either too busy or you can't do that role. So the way that I would also determine rights of substitution is that the client is coming to your company for the work, not specifically to you as an individual for the work. So if they're coming to your company, do you have the right to put anyone within your business, obviously that you trust and respect, into that role? And that's something to consider if it's you as an individual or it's your company.
Yes, and what I would say is that I would suggest to contractors that they start thinking about now forming alliances with people with similar skills so that they can genuinely offer that. That's one of the reasons I want to set up the WhatsApp group, but I'm sure that the ICG would facilitate that as well. So start thinking about that. Right, now the second one, slightly harder to explain, is supervision and control. So basically think of this as, is this a self-contained project that the company is passing on to you, or is it that they just need help with some ongoing work? The way that I explained it in the talk last year sort of makes most sense to me. So if you invite a plumber into your house, they are outside IR35, and that's because what you are saying is, for example, my boiler doesn't work, and then it is totally up to the plumber as to what they do to fix it. You're not sitting there saying, oh, I think you should unscrew this bit, or maybe we should, you know, sort this out and restart this. you're leaving it to the plumber to decide exactly how that particular project should be undertaken. And similarly, within Insight, there are lots of cases where there is a particular project, there's a particular problem that they can come to you and use you as a research agency effectively. So say to you, you know, Texaco need to know whether, I don't know, what the impact of sales on pubs will be for us, and then you think how to address it, rather than just saying, oh, can you write this questionnaire? So it's about taking complete control for the project. Tina, does that make sense? Have you got anything to add?
Yeah, I think it absolutely makes sense. But also, ask yourself, think about the reality of the role. Do you actually have a manager who tells you what to do? Is your client telling you what they need you to do? Or are they saying to you, this is the end result we want to achieve, it's up to you how you deliver that, when you deliver it, who delivers it, so let's just get to the end project. So there's no supervision and control in that respect. But if you report into a manager, and same as an employee that would be sat next to you would, then that's where the area falls out of supervision and control.
Okay, and the next is the one that is most difficult to explain, mutuality of obligation. And almost everyone I've talked to has a slightly different description of what this means. It's definitely not totally clear. Literally, it means an obligation on the work provider to provide work, and an obligation on the individual to carry out that work. So if the employer feels obliged to use you and you feel obliged to work for them, then you are not outside IR35. There has to be an independence on both sides in order to show that you are outside IR35. Now, because it isn't clear, it's not that clear how you show that independence. But if you think, if they're coming to you with a set project, then they don't have to use you, they can commission it to somebody else. Similarly, if you're working for a number of organisations, and you know, it would be great if you won that project, but it's not the be all and end all, then you are not obliged to work for that individual. Whereas if you're going in every day, working on some ongoing stuff, it's your only source of income, then in reality, there isn't mutuality of obligation. Again, Tina, I hope I've made that clear, but please add your comments.
Yeah, I think this is a key test in tax investigations as to determine whether a contractor status. So it's really important to understand the mutuality of obligation. And it's just like as if you're an employee, you know, where you're an employee and you provided work, the service that you provide services to the client, they provide work for you, you know, that's all around mutual obligation. So are they, as you say, Liz, are they obliged to provide you individually with work, and are you individually obliged to conduct that work? So it's a very important point.
Yes. Now, the government did produce something called the Cess Tool, which you can easily find if you Google. And certainly an employer should use this tool to assess whether a job is genuinely outside IR35. There has been a lot of criticism of the tool. They have already updated it. They may update it again. And one of the key things that it doesn't assess is mutuality of obligation, probably because it's not very clear to anyone. So, but it's a good start. And I would suggest to any employer that they at least do this, because it is showing that they are trying to really assess whether a role is outside IR35. It's not the only thing you can do, but it's a good start. The other thing, if you do Google Cess, is that the government have produced an awful lot of other sort of information. So there's a lot you can read online from the government if you Google that in. So that's worth doing as well. If you are outside IR35, so going back to the paperwork, you need to confirm that you have somebody that can be your substitute worker and who that individual is. You need to get confirmation from the client that the role is outside IR35. So SDS is that statement of, I can't remember what that stands for, Tina.
Statement of determination, employment statement of determination.
Okay, so you need to get one of those before you can work outside IR35. And finally, as I said before, you need to change the contracts to reflect that the role is outside IR35. So hopefully that's all clear. Next slide, Tina. Okay, I appreciate that the audience here really is contractors, but I thought it was useful for you to know something about IR35 from the employer's point of view, and then perhaps you can have a conversation with them about, you know, what the options are. So their options are to use contractors inside IR35, as we've already talked about. A lot of companies are just making a blanket ban on doing that. But the bad side of that is that ultimately the rate that the contractors will get is lower than what they were getting as a contractor, because they're paying that additional tax. That's where the 1.9 billion is coming from. Obviously, employers could increase rates to cover that, but I don't see any evidence of them doing that. And frankly, right now, it's not the market for rates to be increased. Also, it's going to cost the employer more, because they'll have to pay employers' national insurance. They'll have the burden of things like, what's the fee that you pay for apprenticeship levy, holiday allowance. So they're going to have to pay all those additional things, and they're going to have to pay a third party on the whole to administer that, and there's going to be a margin on all of that. And then they've also, as I've said, they're then going to have to suddenly pay VAT on payroll, which is not something that they would have done in the past. Yes, they can get that back, but it's not great for cash flow. So yes, they can do all those things, but it's not actually great for either side. They can demonstrate with confidence that the role is outside IR35, and I do think that within Insight there is a lot of project-based work, and it's perfectly possible, therefore, for them to do that. I know that a lot of them are going to be nervous, because obviously they're not going to want to take on that tax responsibility. There are consulting services that they can use. They can certainly talk to us. We are working with specialists, so we can be confident that that they will be covered, that the documentation is complete, that we thought about insurance. Separately, they can also talk to their own insurers. Tina, I did quickly look into this, and you're right, Hiscox is a good insurer for this area. So you can get insurance, and basically the way the insurance works is that they too act as a consulting firm. They ensure that the documentation is correct, and then of course there is limited risk of insuring you. There's also a lot of specialist lawyers looking into this area, and again, they can go through, they can change, they can check the contracts. So there are outside organisations that your employer can go to if they are feeling very nervous about putting somebody outside IR35. then just very briefly, as I say, we are going to do more consulting work in this area, which involves going in, doing a contractor audit, identifying the best approach to employing a flexible workforce, and then managing all the paperwork and the disputes and all of that sort of thing, which, as you can see, there's a lot of room for all of that. I also want to mention the other statement of work just in a little bit more detail. So that is when a third party goes in and it talks to the employer about what their needs are and does an overall audit, and then they can take responsibility for the projects that need contractors, choose the contractors, and the contractors can work through the company, in this case ENI, but other companies I'm sure will be offering this, so they can work through that company and they can still work as a contractor. So that is a model that is worth companies thinking about. I think that's it. Last slide, Tina.
Okay.
So the first thing we added here was anything missed. I don't know, Tina, if you think I've missed anything out.
No, I don't. So I'm just trying to bring you in on video. There we go.
I was so conscious at the beginning that of getting this all right. I'm not sure that I mentioned that ENI recruit for the insight sector. That's all we've ever done, but I'm sure most of you know that. So questions, do we have questions?
Fantastic, that was really, really useful information, both of you. And yes, we've got lots of questions, as I'm sure you can imagine. The first one is, does a contractor need to be a limited company? So if you are a sole trader, does that mean that you don't come under IR35 anyway?
No, doesn't. It makes no difference whether you're a limited company or a sole trader. Moving forward, it is the 3 criteria that determine whether you are outside IR35. And so you have to meet all those 3 criteria, regardless of what your current status is. But, you know, moving forward, I think that in order to meet the things like mutuality of obligation and supervision of control, it would be much better to be a limited company, and certainly you should be insured. So I think that probably means you need to be a limited company as well. Tina, you may know more about that than me.
No, that's fine, Liz. That's fair enough what you said. Happy with that.
So what specific type of insurance do you mean for those outside 35?
So you need insurance to just to show it's, I don't know, for example, you might go completely.
Professional indemnity is your key one, isn't it, for a limited company? And if you have employees as well within your limited company, you've got employees liability as well. So you've got to consider all of the insurances.
Yeah, I mean, it's basically to ensure that if you do something incorrectly by mistake, you know, you are insured, and a company will want that.
Okay. So you could stay outside of IR35, just to be precise. You could stay outside of IR35 as a limited company if you concentrate on working under contract for companies that have less than 10 million turnover. Is that right? And look for specific small defined projects.
So you could continue working outside IR35 in 2 ways. The first thing is that you could work for small companies. They have to meet 2 of the 3 criteria. So it's 50 employees or less, turnover of, I can't remember all the criteria, but it's 2 of those 3 criteria, 10 million, and just 5 million balance sheet. Yeah. Anyway, you have to meet 2 of those criteria. If it is a small company, then it doesn't matter. You don't have to meet any of the other criteria. You can work exactly as you are now. Small company, sole trader, limited company. You can do whatever you like. You can carry on working exactly as you are now. The second way of being outside IR35 is to follow the three criteria that we said: rights of substitution, supervision and control, mutuality of obligation. And you need, if you want to be a contractor working for a larger organisation, that is the only way you're going to be able to do it moving forward. Is that right, Tina?
Yeah, and what the legislation is saying is that the onus is on the end user to identify whether you are a potentially disguised employee. So the onus then becomes on the end user to make that decision in the medium to large businesses. In the smaller businesses, that onus stays with the limited company as it has done for the last 20 years. So you will make that decision as to whether your workers fall inside or outside of 35 and whether they should be taxed accordingly to being a deemed employee or not.
Okay, now we've got a couple of questions about working for foreign companies. So will the new legislation apply? For example, if I work for a French company as an insight consultant, can I still operate as a limited company as before? What if you do a contract for a large company that they're based in the US or abroad? So this whole international area, how does it work in that case?
Dina, you start, because I know you had quite strong opinions on this yesterday.
Yeah, so basically, it's wherever you are as an individual taxed. So if you're taxed overseas, then you come under local legislation for tax purposes. But if you're taxed in the pay tax in the UK, you reside in the UK, then it still applies, because you'll be receiving your money through foreign exchange, and you'll be converting it into dollars, into pounds, and whatever, and paying it into your business in the UK. Obviously, if you don't pay tax in the UK, that's another complication in itself, because you can only reside in the UK for a certain period of time if you're not paying tax, and then if you come back, you can get hit with a great big tax bill if you come back in a certain period of time. But the reality of it is wherever you actually as a business pay tax, whether you're working for a company in Europe or America or Asia, wherever you're paying tax is where you are liable for that legislation.
So in short, if you're UK based but working for a foreign company, then IR35 still applies. But I was thinking about this last night, and I was thinking, but if you're based in the UK and you're working for a Chinese organisation in China, and it turns out that actually not all the correct tax has been paid, you as an individual aren't liable, that company in China is liable. Is the government really going to go after a Chinese company to get that tax? I don't know. I mean, I just thought about it in reality last night and thought, I'm sure you're right, but how it's actually going to be applied, I don't know. Well, none of us know really for sure.
I mean, we're worth doing a bit more research into, but it's a very complex area to consider. But yeah, you can still be a limited company, but then also to consider, well, China don't have to adhere to these regulations because they're not under UK jurisdiction. So how does that apply to me as a contractor working for a multinational organisation in China? So again, that probably comes back to you as the limited company to have to determine the status.
Yeah.
But again,
so if you're based in the UK, to be on the side of caution, then I think you have to think, yeah, I definitely fall within IR35. And certainly if it's an international company with some sort of office in the UK, then absolutely I would worry about it.
Okay, now we have one query here about the rights of substitution. So this person thought that you weren't allowed to use the right of substitution with somebody outside your company, such as another ICG member, for example. It seems this question was asked before, and we were told that it couldn't just be someone you know.
Well, for rights of substitution, my understanding of rights of substitution is very much that that person would work under your limited company, because the idea is that the client is coming to you as a company, not as an individual. If you're substituting, you're not substituting it to a different company. So the person would have to work through your business to be a substitute.
Okay. Yeah, another question. Do substitute workers have to be an employee of your company?
No, they don't have to be a full-time employee, no.
They can work as a
They
freelance.
need to do that project through your company, but they wouldn't need to be an employee, no.
Yeah, okay.
Yeah, I mean, a good example of that is I have associates that work for me within my business. They have their own businesses, but when they work for me, they work under JTHR Solutions, and I pay them a fee and I charge the client, and it works that way. So I'm kind of the intermediary between them and the client. It's my client, but they're working for me on my client. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
Yeah. It's the way you would normally work with somebody.
Yeah.
A partner on a project.
Yeah.
Okay. Good. What kind of changes in contracts with the clients are worth looking at or checking out? Is there anything specific people should be looking for?
Yeah, you have your three areas that Liz keeps talking about: your rights of substitution, your mutuality of obligation, and your direction and control. So they're three key areas in your contract that I think, Liz, you may have more, that you should be considering having redrawn it. But what's also important to remember, and is we had this conversation the other day, I don't actually know the resource that HMRC have got to put at this, because over the years they obviously haven't had enough, otherwise they'd have got more people brought into the pool. But when I was very avid in working within this arena, it was very much that the HMRC was saying we're looking beyond the contract and we're looking at the relationship. So your contract can say that you have the rights of substitution, but does the actual relationship that you have with the client allow you to have that right of substitution? So it's making sure that your contract reflects exactly what your status is with your client.
Yeah, and no, I don't have anything to add. I think that's, yeah,
okay.
I would agree with that.
Another question that's a little bit in the same area. So where do things like retainer arrangements fall within this? If you have a retainer contract with a client, how does that work?
Well, the first thing I would say is that if you are being paid for a project, I mean, think about it by, you know, if you're getting the plumber in, you pay him to fix the boiler. So you're no longer paying somebody an hourly rate, you're paying them to do a specific project. That's how I understand it. So actually, in terms of retainer, then that would add, you know, you could be paid something up front for that project. There's no problem with that as far as I'm aware. Would you agree with that, Tina?
I think from the way I'd look at it, and I might be wrong here, but the way I see it is if you've got a number of retained clients, then great. If you only have one retained client that you're offering all your services to, then that may be a different conversation. Do you agree with that, Liz?
Yeah, no, I think that's a very good point.
Okay. Right, thanks for the webinar, really helpful. It seems though that as someone who does lots of smaller standalone projects for a variety of clients, the safest way forward is to set up a partnership with someone else in the same position. Seems rather unfair that working on your own, you're often outside IR35, while as soon as you're in a partnership with someone else, you can argue substitution more easily. Rather discriminatory, surely, and works against people setting up on their own.
But don't forget that if you're working for multiple clients, this doesn't impact you at all, because you are genuinely a limited company. So I have a multitude of clients. I'm not working with just one client. I'm working with many clients. So therefore I'm a genuine limited company.
And you know, to me, it doesn't seem, I mean, surely if you're working for lots of clients and you've got lots of contacts so that you can juggle the work and make sure that everything is covered, then I'm not sure that's discriminatory. I mean, personally, I think that you know, who wants to work completely alone without having anyone to share ideas and things with? It doesn't feel discriminatory to me.
I think we need to remember as well that this is to identify disguised employees. So a contractor that works for company A 5 days a week, 2 years, only that one client, the HMRC are going to say, guys, I think you might actually be an employee for that period of time. You have one client, you work in one place, and you've got a guaranteed income over that period. That's where you've got to remember, it is all about identifying whether somebody is a disguised employee or are they genuinely a contractor.
Okay. Yeah, there's somebody here who's raising an interesting point. If you're working for a new client, how does the right of substitution help you to nurture your relationship with that client in the event of providing a substitute, i.e. they might just go directly to the substitute person next time they need help? Is there a way you can future-proof yourself while also being able to offer a replacement? I think somebody concerns about having to nominate the person who would be the substitute.
I think what we've got to bear in mind here as well is it's having that ability. You don't have to substitute, but if you were to substitute, is that a possibility? Or is the client saying, I only want you to do this work for me?
Yeah, but I think there it's, do you actually have to name the individual who will be the substitute?
No. You have to you name the individual that's doing the work, and then you would say, but we also have the right to substitute if this person is not available. And then the client says, yeah, that's fine.
Right, okay, that's great. I used to have a limited company with my husband, who's now gone permanent due to IR35. I've therefore now set up as a sole trader and thought this meant IR35 did not apply, although I know they could still check your status. My revenue does not justify the costs of a limited company on my own. Why are you saying that sole traders are affected by IR35?
Because the way that HMRC are looking at it moving forward, they're only concerned with whether you are a disguised employee. So whether you're a sole trader or a limited company makes no difference as far as they're concerned. Their one ambition is to work out whether you're a disguised employee and therefore should be paying more tax. And so the three things are to work that out. And those three things, it doesn't matter, you know, they apply to anyone that is contracting services out, whatever status they are. Does that make sense? So you absolutely, they could continue to be a sole trader. It will be harder for them to then have the rights of substitution, supervision, control, and mutuality of obligation. But there isn't actually anything that says you can't be a sole trader. The key thing is you have to follow those 3 points. Would you agree with that, Tina?
Or work for small businesses, basically.
Or work for small businesses, absolutely. Yeah. And there are a lot of small businesses within Insight. So it doesn't have to be a disaster.
And that's working for smaller businesses where you continue to determine whether your business falls inside or outside 35. It means the end client doesn't have to be responsible for that. So that's the key point to bear in mind. You will decide whether your workers fall within or outside 35, not the end user.
Right, for projects that are clearly projects for an end client where we are acting as a large research agency, as a large research agency would, do we still need written confirmation of being outside IR35?
Yes, but you know, that should be easy to get.
Even if it's a clearly defined project, so you're doing, it's very obviously that you have the supervision and the control aspect.
Yeah, it's just to clarify that this has been checked, because what HMRC want to do is to make sure that companies have double checked. It's a bit like sort of saying, as a recruitment agency, we have to check people's passports to check that they have the right to work in the UK. I mean, often it's pretty obvious that people have the right to work in the UK, but you still need to demonstrate that you have double checked that. And if you haven't, and it does all go wrong, then you're definitely liable. So to be honest, it probably would be absolutely fine if it never went wrong. But if it goes wrong, then the company, the more that they can do to show that they tried to demonstrate it's outside IR35, the more likely it is that HMRC won't come down that heavily on them. Does that make sense?
So is this something that we should be putting as standard in our terms, our business terms, for example? So, you know, we undertake this work on your behalf, and this assumes that this is outside of IR35.
So my understanding, and Liz, you correct me if I'm wrong, because it's the focus is now on the end user to make that decision, they will identify when they, in their policies, what they class as a true contractor or somebody that's deemed to be a disguised employee, and they'll have a process in place for that, stamp the book and say, yes, there you go, there's your declaration of status, that your determination status that you are outside of IR35 for us, and that's the processes that they will have to change.
Yeah, so that's very true. That ultimately, you as a company don't have to worry about it too much. It's the employer, it's the company that will want to have that contractually down, because that protects them. Does that make sense?
Okay, another question here. In working for a large client doing a regular piece of fieldwork each year, my income's not guaranteed. I have a substitute, but at the moment I don't have other active clients, although I am available and able to do so. Is this a strong enough argument for being outside IR35?
Well, the first thing I would say is I'm not sure how that passes supervision and control. So I mean, it may do, but the first thing you've got to think about, it's not just about substitution, it's also about whether this is a set project that you are completing for that particular company, and you determine how that project is run. And then when it comes to mutuality of obligation, then having a number of clients is only one way of showing independence. And remember, it's a two-way thing. So the company has to have other resources that they are also relying on. They're not relying on you to do all their field work. Does that make sense? So mutuality is a two-way thing. Tina, do you have anything to add?
Yeah, I just think that the more clients you've got, the more likely you are to fall outside. If you are working solely for one client all the time, there's a chance that not all the boxes would get ticked, and you may fall within I-35. But quite honestly, 20 years on, it's still a grey area, isn't it? So, you know, it's very difficult to give you a straight answer sometimes.
Right, we're virtually out of time, but just one last question. Am I right to think that just because you're working with small companies doesn't exempt you from 3 tests? It just means that you are responsible for determining it, not the client, but HMRC can still come at you, i.e. just like before April 2021.
Yeah, basically.
Yeah.
That's the answer. Yeah, it's up to you. As it is now, it's your responsibility as a limited company to determine whether you're in or out from April, if it gets passed, it'll be down to the client with the larger companies. But with the smaller companies, you've still got to do that test.
Okay, that's fantastic. So sadly, we've run out of time. There are still some questions, so I don't know whether if we were to feed those through to you, you'd be happy to answer them separately. Is that possible?
Yes.
Or yep, so we can do that.
Our
Okay.
details are, can everybody see our screen? Because the details are on the screen if anybody wants to contact us directly anyway.
Yeah, I don't know. Can they see that?
Probably not, but we can certainly add that information to the video when we put it on our website, so people will be able to find that. Brilliant. Okay, so thank you very much, Liz and Tina, for taking us through that. It's clearly a complex subject, but I think you've certainly given us plenty to think about. Thank you also to our audience for logging in. We hope you found it useful and interesting. And just remains to say, have a great afternoon, everybody, and thanks very much for joining us today.
Thank
Bye-bye.
you. Bye-bye.